Hi everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do a review and updates for the series that I'm reading. Basically, this video is going to be a sort of wrap-up of the year as well as a TBR of series that I want to read in the year of 2022. I was thinking about the best way of talking about these series because I don't want to commit to just watching a bunch of stuff. I thought it made more sense just to talk about what I've been reading and the series that matter the most to me at this moment in time. And of course that could change because a year is a long time. But with that said, I wanted to start by just talking about the books that I had read. So what this means, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my reading list for this year. I'm just going to scroll through and we can stop and talk about the series that I've read. And then once we've done that, we can then start talking about other series that I haven't read this year. The first series that I read, The Archive of the Forgotten, that was book 2 of the Library of Hell series. And I must say, unfortunately, this series is not working for me. The covers are stellar. They're the best things about them, in my opinion. And they're not objectively bad. They're just of a certain tone, and just the writing didn't mesh with me. It was very personal. I couldn't connect to it. It just didn't work. I actually read the second book because I was able to get an e-arc of it on NetGalley, and I thought, I really want to like this series, so I'll give it another chance. That was after already starting book 1, DNFing it, and then starting it again, and realizing both times it wasn't working for me. Now I finished this, and I know it's not working for me, which sucks because this the third book. It's amazing. I mean, Moonphrase, it looks amazing. The cover is beautiful, and I'm pretty sure it's the last in the series, and which makes it even harder not to read because if I made to read 2 out of 3 books, this is not the only series, by the way, that I feel this way. I feel like I should finish this series. It's one of those things I want to be a completionist, but I'm not going to. This series is done for me. I just can't get into it. Next, I reread the Wayward Children series, the first 4 or 5, whatever it was, and then I read the second one, sorry, the 6th one that came out last year. Twice. And needless to say, I absolutely will be reading the newest Wayward Children series, book 7, in 2022. And Over the Woodward Wall, I'll talk about that when I get to the second book that I read this year. Wings of Ebony, book 1 in a series, I don't know what it's called, the Wings of Ebony series. And I must say, I gave this 4 stars, 3.5 rounding up, but in retrospect, I feel like it's probably 3.5 rounding down. This story just didn't work for me. Like, I appreciated it because it was full of very thought-provoking themes and a very unique type of fantasy magic type story, where basically this girl realizes she's from a family of, was it witches or something magical, and she gets to go to school, but the school is very discriminatory, I believe, because she's a muggle, the muggle adjacent, or maybe because she's black, or maybe a mix of the two. There's a lot of conversation here that has to do with discrimination and privilege, and that's one of the best things about the book. But the series just didn't work for me, and I don't think I'm going to be continuing it. Like, I'm not going to. There's no question about it. I'm not going to continue it. So that's the series that I've read and will not be finishing in the future. All Goths Children Do Traveling Shoes. This is not the only story I've read. I've read now this is what, book 3 or 4, and I've now read through book 6, and I plan on finishing the series. I know this isn't really a series when you think of a series, but it is a series of autobiographies, or memoirs rather, and I'm very happy that I'm making progress in this, and I fully intend to finish this in 2022. I thought I was going to this year. I kept pushing it off. I'm planning on reading the last book in her memoir series, which is Mom and Me and Mom, and I'm group reading it, or rather buddy reading it with Bree from Lock Petition, and I really am just waiting for her to tell me when she wants to do a live show, and I'm going to fit it in not long before that. But it's a fantastic series, highly recommend, even though it's not what you think about when you think of a series. Next is The Conductors, book 1 in, what is it just called, Murder and Magic, and Murder and Magic is a good name for it because it's basically a murder mystery. This book is a historical fiction fantasy book where you have people can do magic, and it looks basically, I think, around the Civil War, right after the Civil War. In fact, the story is split between the two, where you have the now being the Civil War, or post-Civil War rather, and you have the meeting of these two main characters, these husband and wife, I believe, and how they came to be around the Civil War times. And I found that story more compelling. I just found their narrative of coming together just a better story for me. And the murder mystery just didn't work for me. I'm not a big fan. At least, I'm not a big fan of this murder mystery. I'm hoping that's not true when I get to, like, say, Agatha Christie, because I want to be able to enjoy those. That's the thing I would enjoy. And I won't be finishing the series. Like Wings of Ebony, this story had a lot of great themes that was, I think, very thought-provoking in what it was exploring. It just didn't work for me as a concept, I guess. Oh, The Hobbit. And I'll expand on this, but like, this was the first book in, would you say it's Lord of the Rings series? It's not really. It's more of a prequel. And I did read it, and it was read by Andy Serkis, the one man who plays Gollum, and it was fantastic. The narration was, rather. The book itself was fine. I enjoyed it, and I will touch more on my thoughts of the series as a whole, and whether or not I plan on finishing it when I get to the actual Lord of the Rings. Clay's Ark. Book 3, which was it 2? No, it was book 3 of I think 5, and I really liked Clay's Ark. But the point is that I read the Pattern series by Octavia Butler. I read that with the Octavia Butler slow read, and I really like Clay's Ark. I think the next two were Survivor and Pattern Master. And I'll show you when we get there. But I like this series a lot. Unfortunately, I do feel like the last two are my least favorite. I'll touch on that more when we get there. But needless to say, I finished the Pattern Master series. There's no finishing that now because it's already done. Will I reread them eventually? Probably not next year. I do think the first 3, Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, and this Clay's Ark, were my favorite of the series, and I'll touch on more why when I get to those last 2 books. Broken Kingdoms, which I believe is book 2 of the Inheritance cycle, and I really like this. I was worried because I'd been so far away from book 1 when I'd read it, and I was worried it wouldn't just stick. And to be fair, there was a lot that didn't stick, but they came back to me because the story itself isn't really following the same characters. I mean, it's a story where gods interact with the mortals, and that feeds into the hierarchy of the system of people in charge. And I thought it was a really well done series to begin with. And then we have the new book, which is basically an entirely different story with brand new characters. Of course, the gods are the same, but we're like a jump in the future. And I liked it a lot. I'm looking forward to reading the last one, even though I probably could stand to reread the first 2. I don't think it's as necessary, which I appreciate. And I think there's a very good chance I'm going to read book 3 in 2022. Actually, I put it high on my list of my series TBR for 2022. I don't actually own it on my physical TBR, which sucks, but honestly, my desire to finish the series, I think, trumps my desire to read from my physical TBR. Would you consider Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass a series? It technically is a trilogy of memoirs, and I read the first 2. The second one I liked more than the first, which I'll link to my full thoughts there because it's a lot to unpack on why I thought the second one was better. I just felt like it was more reflective, and maybe that's unfair of me to say, and it's not my place to say, but I just felt like I got more out of it. It was more, I don't know, I just thought it was a better book overall, but it was also more complete, looking at his bigger life. Going into it after I said I wasn't going to. The third one was it breaking of shackles or something. I'm not sure, but that's the last one of the series. That will definitely be on my TBR for 2 series that I'll be finishing in 2022. Oh, 2001: A Space Odyssey, technically the first book of a series. I liked this. It was kind of disappointing. I don't think it was a classic that really resonated as strongly as it did for some people, and for that I don't think I'll be continuing it. Part of me is intrigued by the concept because I like space, especially planetary travel, and the very dated look at some of these planetary bodies like Europa are just so wrong that it's actually kind of fun to see how he creates this image of these worlds that we knew so little about when he wrote these books in the 1960s and 70s. But if you don't know what 2001: Space Odyssey is, God, watch a trailer for the movie. That's a pretty good synopsis. Fellowship of the Ring, here we are. I read book 1, and I listened to this before the Andy Serkis narration of the trilogy came out, and I listened to the audiobook it was like a fan-made professional audiobook where they use an intersection of his voice as well as with audio and music from the film. And I thought it would help me get more immersed into the story, because I know it still has that very classic writing style that is Tolkien's, and it didn't work. It didn't always work as well as I would have liked it to, and there was some slogs. I think the parts that were pulled from the movie resonated more strongly with me, probably because I could feel it from the movie. That said, I think there's a good chance I'm going to continue the series. I would give it middle of the road on my TBR for 2022. And the big reason for that isn't just because I want to finish it and I love Lord of the Rings, the film, but because Andy Serkis is now narrating it. And his narration of The Hobbit was spot on. And I think we really underestimate, I don't know how to phrase that, I think it's important not to underestimate the power of a good narrator. Not just a good narrator, but one that works with you. I don't know what you might want in a narrator. I like a consistent voice, personally. I don't like a whole cast, usually. I find it more distracting than immersive. I like to be able to switch between voices and feel like they're unique. And I also like them when they're not very strong in the British side. Like, I never liked the narrator of this series or the narrator of Lord of the Rings, not Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, because of the fact that they were just very classic, strong English accent. And for whatever reason, I've struggled with those. Not my favorite, and I'm just excited to have him narrating this series. Falling to Heaven, Maya Angelou. The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. This I will almost. I'm giving this series. This is book 2 of a trilogy by M.K. Jemisin, Broken Earth trilogy, and I think I would give this middle of the road on my TBR for 2022. Not because I don't have an intense desire to read it, because I do, but because it's like the inverse of the Inheritance cycle. The 2 books so far at least, depend so heavily on each other, and they're all so complicated that so many of the details are just completely lost. And if I want a true, complete picture, not picture, but a true experience of what the book has to offer to really appreciate it, I need to reread the first 2 leading up to this. And I do want that experience. I want the best experience I can get out of it. And I also think I would enjoy rereading them. So I need to reread them. And they're not necessarily thin books. That's why I put them on middle of the road, because it's a question of whether or not I'll be able to fit all 3 of those books in a way that this feels natural to me. I say natural, more like just one that I'm comfortable doing. Hopefully I will be able to make it work. And like I said, middle of the road on my TBR. Rolling in the Deep technically is a series, Into the Drowning Deep, the Mermaid series by Mio Grant, aka Sean McGuire. I liked it. Does that count as a series? It does. But I read it. Tale of Genji should have been a series. That shit is so fucking long. So many chapters. It's not technically a series. My Bondage and Freedom. Actually, that was book 2 of the Frederick Douglass series, and that was the one I thought resonated really well. I guess to jump back real quick to why, I thought the first one felt as if Frederick Douglass was writing his story of his time as a slave on paper because it needed to be preserved. And then this one felt like it was more cohesive look at his life, not just at slavery itself, but at his life and at slavery and at the infrastructure of America as a whole, not just in slavery but outside of it as well. And that's why I meant by it being more reflective. But anyways, I plan on, like I said, being the 3rd one. Survivor and Powder Master. Powder Master suffered because I waited so long to finish Survivor before the live show, and I had to rush through Powder Master because I got my dates wrong. And I really think there's a good chance actually I'll reread this book maybe next year, maybe on my low series TBR of the book I want to read, of a series I want to finish. Because technically I did finish it, but I rushed through it in literally like a day's time. Even though it's small, Octavia E. Butler's books are intended to be reflective, and I don't think I really did that. There was so much opportunity there to reflect on just how the stories all tie together. So I'd put Powder Master as a reread and to finish off the Powder Nest series in 2022, low on the TBR there. Would you consider The Glorious Cause? You probably wouldn't, but who cares? Was it Oxford American History series of nonfiction history books. And this is book, I don't know what, I read Battle Cry of Freedom a couple years ago when I first started my YouTube channel. Really liked it. And so I wanted to read a book that was just post American Revolution, and I still want to read that. That cover is, I don't know, here. I felt like I needed to read the book on the American Revolution first, which I did, and it was iffy. Luckily, they're all different authors, and so I would say book 3 in this nonfiction series I'll be planning on reading in 2022. I'd put it low to middle of the road. Foundation. I almost came close to reading the 2nd and 3rd book. I really like Foundation. I actually read it originally just to watch this show, which I have yet to actually watch the show. I've heard it was fine, and I can do fine. I just need to sit down and commit to it. It's one of those shows where I want to really appreciate all the production value that went into it. I really like this show's far future. It really avoids looking at the conflict and more at the planning and the science, and just the concept of preserving culture and science. But at the same time, this was actually when I realized that Isaac Asimov was a sexist asshole. He has one woman in here that he doesn't treat very well, but she's such a minor character. The problem really is that they don't have any women in this far future. It's such a huge patriarchy, and it really undercuts the efficiency, or the effectiveness rather, of the narrative. Nevertheless, I do want to finish it. I plan on continuing it. I think there's a good chance. A high on my TBR, I'll put book 2 of the Foundation series, and low on my TBR, I'll put book 3. Beyond that, I don't think I'll necessarily get to them because I have other series I want to continue out. And Killing Moon, book 1 of Duology by N.K. Jemisin, and this was unfortunately probably my least favorite book from N.K. Jemisin. This one did not work for me very well. I do want to finish this series. Short of being prompted by Bree or someone else to buddy read it, I probably won't get to it in 2022. It's just, I have so many other N.K. Jemisin books I want to finish, series I want to finish. I don't think it's going to be a priority. And since I didn't love it as much, I don't think there's as good a chance I'm going to continue it on. But I did talk about this and buddy read it with Bree, and I'll make sure I link to that talk if you're interested in watching it. Here we go. Along the Saltwise Sea, book 2 in the Up and Under series by A. Deborah Baker, aka Sean McGuire, in this character from the Middle Game series. I like this. I've talked about it before. I will absolutely continue the series if it comes out next year, which I think the next book is, book 3 of 4. And this one I didn't love. I mean, I liked it, but I felt like it wasn't as complete as the first one. The first one felt like it was a complete idea, and this was a continuation idea. It just didn't feel like it fit the structure of the first book. The first book felt like it was a compendium of little stories like this one, and this was just one medium to large size story that could have been plucked from the first book. So in a sense, like, it still fit the style of the story. It just didn't feel like it stood on its own as well as the first one did. I will be continuing it regardless. Year of the Witching. I don't think book 2 is coming out next year, and I don't think there's a good chance I'm going to read it. I didn't love this book. I talked about it with Erica from The Broken Spine, and I'll give myself a 50-50 chance of reading it, this next book. I'm going to wait until it's out and I've heard enough discourse about how effective it is at tackling these ideas that I think, after discussing with Erica, I can see now the problems I had with the book. I can see how she was sort of teeing it up to being addressed in the next book. I can appreciate that. And whether or not it's effective, based on other people's opinion and discourse of the book once it comes out, will decide whether or not I choose to continue that series. But definitely not 2022. Because I don't think it's coming out in 2022. The 12, by Justin Cronin, book 2 of this Passage trilogy, story about what we make vampires, basically, and as a dystopia, this book series. It should be an easy, like, Stephen King level fun book, and in some ways it is. I really liked the first book, and then I started reading the second book some 10 years ago, probably, when it first came out, and I stopped because I got bored, and I returned to it now because I wanted something easy to read, and because it's read by one of my favorite, if not my favorite, audiobook narrator, Scott Brick, and I figured it'd be easy enough to get back into. And at first it did, but then I just would have lost interest. It jumps forward in time multiple times, and we don't lose some key characters because it is a vampire story, but we do get a lot of new ones, and I just wasn't invested. And even more than that last series I was talking about, the Library of the Forgotten or whatever series, this trilogy is one that I really I think it would be easy enough to finish, but I just don't have the passion. I don't have the interest in really doing it, but I hate so much that I am leaving this series, this trilogy, incomplete, and it frustrates me. I know it shouldn't, but I'm saying it. It's not going to be on my TBR moving forward. I'm done with the Passage trilogy. It just doesn't work for me. I guess I'm spoiling my wrap-up for December, but who cares? Parable of the Talents. This one, what a pleasant book to talk about. This was my second book of the duology that is Earthseed by Octavia Butler, and this might actually be my favorite Octavia Butler book I've ever read, which also means it might be my favorite book ever read. I'm not sure, because Kindred is up there, my top book of all time, or one of two at least. I'm not ready to say that it is my favorite of all Octavia Butler of all time, because I've only read it one time. I need to reread it first. And for that point, I'm pretty sure it's on the to-do list for 2022 to get to the Earthseed series duology in the Octavia Butler slow read. So while I have read this series, I actually read book 2 because when we finally get to the Octavia Butler slow read, I did not want to get to it having to reread the first book for a second time after I already read it once. Like, I reread it one time after not liking it the first time, and like I didn't want to have read the first book 3 times and the second book once. And boy, am I glad I did that. This second book was phenomenal. I think it did a really good job of taking these core concepts and putting us in a direction of, is this realistic? Is this imaginary world of trying to create your own community realistic? And it was dark, and it was reflective, and it was so predictive. It was poignant on it was prescient rather, on the reality of where we're at today. And I love the overall message, and I hate that we won't be getting a book 3 because Octavia Butler has died, and in the years after she wrote it, book 2, even though she had the idea for a story, which I think I will save for another discussion video, she just couldn't flesh it out. I mean, these two work really well as a complete series. I just hate knowing that there could have been more, always could be more, and we didn't get that. But a phenomenal book. So good. And so, yeah, I read it. I finished the series. Yay me. And I'll be reading it again in 2022. So that's high on my TBR. Both those books are for 2022. Finally, The Vampire Lestat. That's right. I reread this when I found out that Anne Rice had died. It was very sad finding that out. And originally I read this book as well as Book Interview with the Vampire and book 3, The Queen of the Damned, the first of this, basically the trilogy, the original trilogy of this Vampire Chronicle, which is now like 10 books or whatever. Even more if you mix in the Riches of Wayfair, whatever it is, that sort of tie into the worlds. And when I first read these books, they resonated very strongly with me. And for a long time I thought, is The Vampire Lestat one of my favorite books of all time? I don't want to spoil my big discussion, but the big picture is there were some important themes that she touches on in this series that very much reflected what I was going through in my young adulthood, from my queerness to my non-religionness. Is that a word? And what else? And just with that reflection on life and death. And those things were all done in such a profound way that really connected with me. And that book made it really stand out. And now, will I continue the series? I stopped after book 3. I read book 3 because the Vampire Lestat has a bit of a cliffhanger, and I had to know what happened. And then I read book 3, and I got kind of bored, and I was like, okay, I don't want to continue. But now that she's died, and now that I reread The Vampire Lestat, I really do kind of want to continue the series. I want to go back to the Interview with the Vampire and see whether or not it actually was my lesser favorite of these two, because I did end up liking The Vampire Lestat more. I want to reread that one, and then The Queen of the Damned, and I think I might continue the series. Now, beyond just getting kind of bored with book 3, I also knew that between writing these first 3 books of the Vampire Chronicles and today, or then 2010s or whatever, Anne Rice had gone from being an atheist to being a devout Christian to being a Jesus follower who was also a humanist. And I was very worried that we'd get to a book where her religiousness would make its way into the story, and she would turn what is essentially a godless narrative into one where God is rooted into the story. And don't like that idea even now, but I'm more comfortable with the possibility than I was then. And so it was one of the reasons why I didn't want to continue on, is I don't like that idea that maybe her future self, her future ideas might warp this perception of one of my favorite things about the series, which was its ability to have this supernatural, dark, vampiric story without a real God, without no seeming God behind it. I think there's actually a lot of great discussion that can be had about the Vampire Chronicles, and I'm tempted to ask people if they want to do a buddy read, but I do think I'll be continuing on. At least one book, let's say The Interview with the Vampire, I'll be putting mid to high on my TBR series for 2022. Those are the series that I've read and how they reflect on my TBR coming forward, but there's a few more coming. Stand with me a little bit longer if you can. Now let's talk about books I did not get to this year that I've started, series I've started but I want to continue. Game of Thrones. I read the first book, did not like the narrator, could not get into it that well, but I loved, past tense, the show. And I still want to try again. I think before I read book 2, I'll have to reread book 1. So I'd put low on my TBR for 2022 is to reread book 1 for the second time. Or was that the first time? I think it was the first time. And hopefully that works out. And I would put even lower, like below on my TBR, like imaginary TBR, potential for book 2 if I really get to book 1, which I don't think I necessarily will that strongly. And then beyond that, let's talk about Wheel of Time, because that was a series I started a long time ago, and I stopped at the book 7 and gave up on it because I was just getting bored. There are a lot of things that go into that. For starters, I had read the entirety of the Sword of Truth series, which really was a carbon copy of the Wheel of Time, but also not as well structured, I think. And I think I got burned out with epic fantasy for a while there. And I regret reading Sword of Truth first, because I feel as though, based on what I hear from people in the fantasy community, I feel like I would have gotten more out of, would have had a better appreciation for fantasy at large if I had stuck with Wheel of Time. And having the show come back, the show now adapted, it makes me interested in reading the first book, especially with it now being narrated by Rosamund Pike. And don't get me wrong, my favorite thing about Wheel of Time was, of course, Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. But I think I was thinking that maybe this new narrator might be a way of getting me into the story again. But the reality is, this is one of many epic fantasies that I want to read, and I know right around the time that I left, the story starts to slip. And before I dedicate a slice of my life to this, even with the amount of reading that I am doing, which is not negligible, I don't think I'm ready to commit to it. So I'm going to say, unfortunately, I'm not going turning to the Wheel of Time, which I know maybe why I'm including in this video, just because it's more than just a TBR, it's a reflection on what I'm thinking about reading and what I've been thinking about reading. And I don't think I'm going to do it. And I say thinking about reading, I get so close to reading it that I downloaded the audiobook with Rosamund Pike on my phone, but I don't think I'm going to do it. Instead, I think I'm going to focus my attention on returning to Brandon Sanderson's epic fantasy series. I would like to continue Mistborn. I'd put it low on my TBR for 2022, but I think higher up, like midway, I'd put rereading the first book, Way of Kings. Not because I didn't like it, but because it's like one of those books I know I'm not going to retain basically anything if I don't return to it, especially reading it by audio. The first time was disappointing because it wasn't quite what I wanted and because it was just overwhelming. And I'm hoping now I can return to it with a better mindset, but also there were people who do giant reviews of those type of books, like Daniel Green or Elliot Page. Elliot Brooks, sorry. And I think I might watch those as I'm reading along to help me just follow along. Not that I can't, it's just, it's a lot of detail, and I want to remember it. It's just, I don't want to take notes, and I took the notes, so I don't want to just do that. The point is, I want to return to that series, partly because I did like it as a whole, and it's one of those things where I think it has the potential to really, I want something that will get me passionate about what I'm, like a fandom I can get passionate about. Like I had that with certain books, but I want more of it. And I think Wheel of Time, not Wheel of Time, Stormlight Archive is what it is. Series has the potential to do that, and it's the first half is done too. So like, I want to invest more of my time into that. Then after that, I would put very low on my TBR, Dune. I own Dune. I bought it, so I should read it. But also, I bought it and wanted to read it specifically because the movie was coming out, and it's out now, and people love it. And I haven't watched it yet because I want to read the book first. Damn it! A gust of wind came and blew it down. Where was I? Yeah, I want to read it. And why haven't I? I honestly do not know. I don't have a good answer for that. I wish with all my heart to fly the dragons in the land of hearts.
I wish with all my heart to fly with dragons in a land apart.
Okay, but seriously, I just haven't felt the drive. After hearing Books and Lala's love of it, it makes me a little bit more excited for it because I do feel like I tend to appreciate what she likes. Well, obviously not all the time, but sometimes, a lot of the time. And that's a motivating factor behind it, but still not quite enough. I don't have my entire year planned out. I have January planned out, and I'm glad I haven't gotten too. I'm glad I've sort of set back when it comes to planning my TBR months in advance because it's fun as it is. It's too much pressure. As it stands, though, I still don't see Dune, broadly speaking, fitting in to what I'm being driven to read. But again, a year is a long time, so that might change, and I'm putting it low on my TBR here, books I want to read, a series that I want to get to. And then beyond that, there are other series I'd like to start that are primarily just book arcs that I have, and I don't really want to talk about those because I'm not that passionate and really just reading them because they're an arc. If I get passionate about them, or even at the end of next year, I might talk about them. But for now, that's, I think, all the series that I've been reading or want to read, I've been thinking about reading. That's it. I hope you've enjoyed this sort of discussion-style TBR wrap-up video. I've enjoyed giving it. I'm realizing now, the more videos I'm making, I'm appreciating just this ability to sit down and have a discussion with y'all, rather than this standard structure. I feel a little more comfortable doing that. So I hope y'all are enjoying it. As always, stay safe, and I'll see you all next time, okay? And happy holidays.